Chapter 26, Fuel for the Winter. Well, boys, are you all set for the day? Whoa there, Blackie. Run in and get me a half-quarter of nugget, Mikey. Seamie, will you cut me a small branch from the willow tree? He asked as he handed his sharp penknife to the youngster. Not knowing why that was necessary, he nevertheless did as asked and was back over the roadside wall in minutes. Good lad. That's for the old headaches. I'd be lost without the Protestants and their hanging tree. He laughed heartily as he saw the understanding flash in Seamie's eyes. School was out, as it was Easter. Many of their neighbours and school pals were already on the bog, getting the high bank ready for cutting. The kishes had to be checked, and the rutted tracks made ready for Blackie to draw out the turf on wooden barrows. The nugget owned a fair-sized plot in Ascot Bog, and that would be prepared for before heading to Abbeyshrule Bog, where his son Rex had acquired a much better one for the princely sum of 10 shillings. The government, led by De Valera, had ordained that a portion of bogland was to be made available to anyone living in the hinterland that could work it. This grant referred only to turbary rights and didn't allow for some greedy farmers who owned the land itself. This in turn led to difficulties in later times, as a few farmers from Clonbryn muscled in on the unwary and cut the turf themselves, or sought to take it over. There was no such difficulty with the nugget or the Rex, as they guarded their rights by consistently cutting a little each year, enough to do 2 years normally. The nugget was not one to take chances. Cut enough for 2, he advised his son Michael, more commonly known as Rex, due to once having a dog called Rex, who was never far from his side. Experience told the nugget that heavy rain could wash them out of the bog or make the channeling of the water highly dangerous. The high bank could slip and bring tons of turf in on top of the slayensman. The age-old art of directing the water around the various bog holes was essential for good maintenance. There were many things to bear in mind: pressure, depth, flow, and of course, the neighbours. Poor work by one neighbour could do a lot of harm and force the water in on one another. The nugget knew the bog, as did his son. As soon as they reached their patch of bog, they were checking the drains and the kish that led into the inner bank. This homemade bridge was essential to the success or failure of the entire operation, as it was the only crossing of the deep drain that bisected their spread bank. Joe Mack owned a stretch alongside the Rex. A conscientious neighbour, he treated the demarcation lines between both spreads with respect, which is more than could be said about other neighbours. The potstick owned the drop bank on the opposite side to the Rex, but in a hollow underneath. In order for the potstick to work his section, it was imperative that those above him treat theirs properly. There was never a dispute between them over how the water was channeled, because the neighbours prided themselves on their workmanship, whether it was the safe use of their own area, the movement or sluicing of the water into the big drain, which would take it safely away from all concern, or the temporary narrow channels which diverted the water on each day's cutting. The high bank, as it was known, was ideal for spreading the turf to dry out. This took weeks and was labour-intensive. Firstly, the drains had to be secured and deepened sufficiently to take the surplus rainwater, but not so much as would dry the surface too much and cause shifting or the collapsing of the drains. A brief inspection of how the land lay was followed by the slunging that was of the soil or turf that was useful for burning, but ideal for filling in the previous year's bog holes. This topsoil mainly whins, gorse, heather and clumps of rough grass, required care to cut away properly, or the turf underneath was often kept in place by the upper growth, could slip and take all with it. Years of toil preparing their work had lent a special professionalism to the undertaking. The slunging, or digging away of the top yard, was usually completed in one day. The surplus material being pushed down into the previous year's bog hole, forming a platform for the judicious use of the area beneath it. Care had to be taken also to allow enough turf to form a wall between the past year's cutting and the present. This section of peatland was commonly known as the hill for obvious reasons. It stood above the surrounding spread banks and was therefore much drier. Although the turf on the hill was better quality and dried quicker, it was often brittle and difficult to handle. It burned beautifully, giving off a pleasant odour, and was easy to set alight with some dry tinder such as moss, small sticks or paper. Nothing went to waste in or outside the house. What didn't burn was used in a myriad of other ways. Just jute or the more recent plastic bags could be used to insulate roofing in the outhouses or truss between walls to keep the heat in during the depths of winter. Likewise, the bags could be used to carry heavy loads of turf, turnips, mangels, or any kind of fodder for the cattle. Cloches made from those bags protected lettuces and frost-endangered vegetables, thus ensuring an earlier crop. What would we do without them was Granny's oft-spoken preamble to a neighbourly chat. Rex invariably deferred to his father in deciding when everything was ready. "I think we could start soon," was the signal to pull out all the stops. Everything was well organised as usual. He just needed a nod from his father. The 3 generations would only vacate the bog when the midges became unbearable. Certainly not before everything was in place for the following morning. Blackie, who had been feeding quietly beside the big cherry tree, was harnessed to the cart, which was loaded with the tools of the day. Out the rutted bog lane, down the long straight road at an easy trot, past the graveyard where Fitzsimons's thatched shebeen stood, and where most of the dead had drunk their fill at some stage during their lives, and on across the Inny Bridge into the charming little village of Abbeyshrule, where pints were sunk as fast as the Titanic. Hard working and hard living, they seldom shied from an opportunity if it showed at all. Though rarely partaking of the demon drink, the women were compensated with the drug of careful housekeeping, with sex as a sideline when their menfolk felt like it. It wasn't the case with all of them, because their needs being greater, they sought companionship that gave a buzz no drink could touch. Past masters of nature's lures, they could raise the dead with a tongue or finger. Hadn't their sister told them all would be forgiven in the confessional, especially if they caught the pastor's attention and drew him into their web?